Welcome to the In-Between, where shift happens. This podcast is for anybody who has ever found themselves in that space in between what was and what's going to be. That space where life happens. The moment between where we are and where we're going. That space that is often uncomfortable to sit in. The stuff of life, the ups, the downs, the moments of connection and insight, and the moments where we can't see two steps in front of us. We will ask all the questions, maybe find some answers, and generally work at being okay in the mystery of the in-between. And this week, in this episode, we are going to tackle the myth of rugged individualism. And so what a perfect topic to be talking about this week, because it actually came up in last week's episode. So the way this is going to work is I have come up with a couple of questions that Ryan has never seen before. And so this is the first time. And so I'm going to be asking them on the spot, and we're just going to have some conversation about it. And rugged individualism is kind of one of those topics we love to hate to have to talk about or something. So I think let's just jump right into it. In our last episode, we basically said that the era of rugged individualism is coming to an end, or at least needs to, and hopefully is. So, Ryan, how would you explain to someone who has never heard the term what rugged individualism even is?
Oh, like in 50 words or less?
Like 10 words. No, we're going to count.
I mean, I think, like, simply put, it's this idea that we have to go it alone, that somehow our worth, our value, our efficacy as a human being is this ability to do things and not have to need or want or have support or help from other people or other things around us. So it's this kind of illusion that if you have to ask for help or if you lean into resources or lean into support networks, that somehow that signifies a weakness on your end, and you're only doing that because there's some sort of deficit. And so now I have to seek out ways to kind of fill that deficit. And so that mindset that really, I think, it really goes against the grain. It goes against our ingrained need for connection and community and all the things. And so it kind of, I don't know, hinders or is a barrier, I think, to lots of to connection, to community, to that interconnectedness that we know that exists. So that's what I would say. Yeah. That's what rugged individual, and it's always, and it's like that need for or reaching out is negative, is a weakness. And so the strength is that I can go it alone and do everything myself. And man, is that exhausting.
Yeah. There's a lot
so
of
not only are we going it alone, but we're really tired doing it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of shoulds behind rugged individualism. Like, you should be able to do all these things, and if you can't.
And I'm not sure who was the first person that did the shoulds, right? It's really interesting. A lot of things that societal expectations and things that we say, oh, you should do this, you should do that.
Yeah.
Who said?
Right.
Like, who said? And it's almost like this kind of this mass sort of wave of energy, and we don't really know where it started,
right?
Or where it began, or who it began with, or like you can't pinpoint back a time in history, like the first person, So it's like this weird,
right,
sort of mass following, of these ideas, and it's like, wow, like someone else.
It's got that like middle school rumor vibe to it, where like,
oh yeah,
nobody wants to be the one to, so you just kind of jump on board. You're like, no, of course I can do all those things. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, don't call me out. Don't point the finger at me. Well, and it's a weird thing. So I did actually spend quite a bit of time at one point a few years ago looking into like where did this come from, and like why. And the best I could find was that it came out of like the gold rush age, where you're like literally off on your own in the wilderness, like panning for gold. And so if you get injured, there is no neighbor to turn to, where prior to that, everybody lived in some sort of community where you absolutely depended on each other. And so
Right.
it wasn't like a point of pride. I mean, it might have been, I don't know, but it was like out of necessity, where these people were going off into the wilderness on their own for extended periods of time. But it wasn't necessarily, at least my understanding, it wasn't a lifestyle. It was, for this period of time, I'm going to have to depend on myself. I'm going to have to be self-reliant in this way. And similar time period, Emerson, kind of this whole self-reliance
Self-reliance. Yeah.
essay, right? Which then did, I think, become like a personalized, internalized, like, worldview. And then in the 20s, it actually became politicized, where it was like a running platform for the president, like
Yeah.
rugged individualism. And then it just, I
Well,
think,
in the 1950s and like the American dream, and you got to do
yeah,
this, and this, and that, well, at least, in our context here in the United
yeah,
States.
right,
Um,
yes,
and I think it's really interesting. I wonder if, because I do think that our society tends to lean toward this sort of individualistic sort of framework. And I wonder how that translates in other parts of the world where it's
yeah,
a more communal sort of understanding, a more communal way of life. And I think it's just very interesting. I wonder how that would translate.
yeah,
Um, for me, it's exhausting. And I've bought
yeah,
into it. And even now, it's like the residual effects of that. So in times of challenge or struggle or whatever, my first instinct is to retreat. My
yeah,
first instinct is not to ask for help or lean into that. Now, more and more, it's becoming kind of in my top 5, right? It used to be like, there is no way I will be like,
mhm.
um, crawling like in the mud before I
Yeah,
even look at that. Because it was for me internalized. Internalized this story that that's weakness, that I
yeah,
should be able to do it alone. I should be
yeah,
able, you fill in whatever that you should be able to do. And
right,
so I think that there's still echoes of that, that I have to remind myself or the people around me who are my support networks. You have reminded me that several times,
same,
that we can lean it, and we remind each other of that, right?
yeah,
But I think it's just like it's been a gradual layering. I think it is a gradual
yeah,
removing of the layers
yeah,
of
yeah.
that. At least
So
it feels like that in my brain.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So you kind of just touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious what you think the importance of talking about this conversation, talking about rugged individualism, talking about the impact of it. Why is it important? And you might have just started to touch on that already, but
Well, I think, like, first off, I think it's important because I think that we have assumed a value system that isn't ours, right? And this is just a
yeah,
value system, I think that's been, well, in our
certainly
generation, it's a value
certainly
system
not
that has
mine.
been, right, value system that's been kinda carried down and ingrained and
Right.
whatever. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important to have these conversations because then we can realize, "Oh, where did that come from? Well, that is
Right.
not my value." And so it just made like some sort of learned behavior. And then like these conversations allow us to bring sort of like the root of that to the surface and then decide,
Yeah.
and this is that my value? Am I all 100% in for rugged individualism, or is that something I've learned? And so then we get to make the decision. And some people may say, yes, that is my value, regardless of where it came from. And that's fine. But I think that the conversations really highlight like the underlying source of some of our thoughts and beliefs and behaviors and our activity in the world. I think that's true of anything, not just this topic, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important. And I think it's also important because I feel like there is a shift. I can't really pinpoint it, but it does feel like energetically there's this shift that people are beginning to understand the value of community, the value of connection, or the reality of it,
Yeah.
of connection. This idea that my life, the decisions I make, whether I know it or not, whether it's easily seen or not, directly impact the world
Mhm.
around me. And so when we become more conscious of that through our conversations, then we can really begin to actively choose and move and shift in ways that support not only ourselves but others. And so I
Yeah.
think that is an important piece of this conversation. And I think also we are just damn tired. And so I think people are just so tired and they're like, what the heck? Why am I so tired? And then I think we're looking back and saying, that's why I'm so tired, because I have been sold this lie that I have to do it myself. And I
Yeah.
think we're like, bump that. I mean, wow.
Enough.
Like,
Yeah.
our generations coming up are like, no, sorry, we're not buying that shit,
Yeah.
and then, okay, so then what are we gonna, like, put in its place? And so that's where we're having these conversations of connection and community and just this, mutual support and social justice and social activism and this sort of, um we-based movements, um, that don't negate the me, but it does this. It's just supportive of the we, and I think it's because honestly, we're tired, and I think
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
we're having more and more of these conversations now because we're tired and we can't really pinpoint why, and I
Yeah. Yeah.
think that's what's coming to the surface.
And it's interesting. Well, I don't know. It's interesting. It's what is coming to mind is just how clear it is that there is. I don't know if rugged individualism was intentionally a racist idea
Mm,
and a classist idea, or if that's what happened because of it.
yeah,
But there's definitely an inherent relationship between rugged individualism and racism and classism. And there is this like, if everyone is supposed to be able to do all the things on their own, you're kept so busy struggling and trying to achieve something that's impossible.
mm,
It kind of keeps you distracted from like, wait a minute, this is stupid, right?
yeah,
And so I think there's a lot of underserved and oppressed communities that have probably for a long time been really tired to the point that like you and I are now,
yeah,
that we're only now getting to a point where enough people who were benefiting, like I benefited from the rugged individual mindset for a large part of my life because that dream still seemed possible. It wasn't like it wasn't made so far out of reach that I needed to like totally abandon it, right?
yeah,
And it doesn't mean that I wasn't impacted by it negatively. It doesn't mean I didn't have privilege from it, but I think it's only recently where it's become so clear that for so many more people, it's so out of reach and like that we're like, wait a minute, this is stupid. As if it's like, I mean, it's something new to me, but it's not something. It's not something new, right? I mean, this. I think there's been communities that for long ass time have been tired in a way that I'm only really starting to recognize recently, which also circles back around to the inherent the inherent issue with it, which I didn't necessarily think, hey, when we talk about this, let's make sure we go here, but
right,
we'd probably be amiss not to in that same light. Like, yeah, that's a huge part of this, especially like so communities that needed to rely on community. w- you know we're fine, you and I personally, like I know through our personal experience, like we're finding that for the first time now that like we need to.
yes, yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm glad you you brought up that racist and classist and all that stuff, all the stuff that is like ingrained in the structure of at least, in the context of the United States, our frameworks, our structures, our governments. I mean, every aspect is tainted with this. And so
Yeah.
what did we expect? I mean, that not to really just become so ingrained in every aspect. And I think it does keep this sort of hierarchy of value, hierarchy of
Mm.
worth, hierarchy of um, like deserved and undeserved sort of things. Like, well, if you work hard, then you deserve
Oh,
this,
yeah.
or if you don't, then you don't deserve this. As if food and housing and medical care and all the things that are necessities as if they are deserved things.
Yeah.
And so I think that this conversation, even though on the surface it may not seem like it's rooted in that, this conversation of rugged individualism really does put a spotlight on
Yeah.
uh, this deserve, like you have to
Yeah.
work so
Yeah.
hard, so
Yeah.
then now you can get some of the benefits,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, what the hell?
Well,
I mean, and I guess it's so obvious to us because we've been in these conversations for a
right.
while, but yeah, I think that this idea of rugged individualism feeds into that, as if we are not, um, it is not our responsibility to care for people. It's not our
Yeah.
responsibility to make sure people are housed, are clothed, are not in food insecurity, have enough food, have medical care. I mean, right?
Yeah.
I
Oh,
feel like is this like a crazy idea that just by being human, that you are worthy and valued to have all of those things,
and
and
yeah,
it's
and
up to
deserving
us,
of those things.
right? And deserve and like, and there's no
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
is, and it's up to us to figure out how to do that without these like arbitrary rules and guidelines, and that people in power or people who are have the privilege are going to decide who is deserved
Yeah.
and who is not deserving of things.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
You getting me worked up about this, man.
Sorry,
Let me
I'm
tell you.
getting, I feel myself getting
Yeah,
worked up
no,
about
I'm
it.
getting all hot. I'm like, yeah, well, and there's so much language in our society that even supports that and ingrains those ideas, like the cost of living. It just
Right.
becomes such a normalized term that I don't think most people think about it. But if you stop for a moment, like there is a cost to be alive. You have to pay to exist. You have to pay to live. There
Which
is
is so
literally
icky.
like it's illegal to live. Like it's illegal to be poor. It's illegal to live without paying for certain things. We pay for water. We pay for food. We have to pay for shelter, for clothes. Like, yeah, there are some basic things in our lives that like are necessary, like human, like the most basic human needs that we have developed systems where you have to pay for and people profit and benefit from.
Yeah.
And that just like I remember like the moment that first really hit. Like I had kind of toyed around the idea, like, oh, the cost of living, what a ridiculous idea. But then like it hit one day, it just like sunk in, like, oh my god, that's
It's
insane. Like
gross. It's gross.
there was, yeah, it is gross, it really. And there was a time where you didn't have to pay for a home. You literally just like went out into the wilderness, like cleared a plot, chopped down a bunch of trees, and started a village. You built a cabin. You built like or however it worked, whatever it was. Like
Yeah.
the idea of buying a house, like the housing market is a manifested industry. Like we created that. The banks created that so people could like it's insane. It's
Right.
insane. And then the fact that we have to pay for water. Like the fact that like someone or a state can own water, like you have water rights that we fight over. Like how much water from this river do you get to use? Like, oh man.
Yeah, and it's,
Yeah.
what it is, as this conversation goes on, it's so hard to get for me to like not get mired down in just the
Yeah.
absurdity of it all. And
Yeah.
then it's like, so what is like that's the reality. This is what we're swimming in. So like how do we begin to change the current?
I
Oh, is
swear
that the next
you didn't.
question?
I swear everybody, they did not get these questions in advance. Yeah. So it's kind of a two-part question. One is like, what's like the utopian ideal? Like if it wasn't rugged individualism, what is it? What does it look like for everything to be perfect in the world of Ryan?
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
what
In my
is,
own world or just in
yeah,
general?
for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I could see a large plot of land and like groups of people living on it and sharing resources and sharing energy and sharing all the things and living in this sort of supported, interconnected sort of way. And I think we do that, emotionally, like with our friend groups and family groups, but like
Like
really
we
doing
literally
it,
do that. Yeah.
like, yeah, literally, yeah. And so
Yeah.
like not so big, going beyond this emotional interconnectedness, which I think that we do cultivate in our support networks, but like really like the physical, down and dirty, everyday life interconnectedness. And like,
Yeah.
wow, like when I like think about that, like it's like a weight of this like personal responsibility that everyone has to pay for their own house, pay for their own food, do all the like all the things. It's like we recreate this billions of times over all over the world, right? And so what would it look like if we didn't have to do that so much? If we really did lean into those supports beyond just emotional support, but like actually, so for me, that is what that would feel, that sort of, I feel like the weight of having to go it alone, it feels lighter, that sort of concept. But I think, steps towards that, I think is for me when in times that I need something, stopping and then not allowing my default response to be the first one. And I think that's probably true of all of us. So my
Wow.
default response is to not ask for help. My default response is to think that I'm weak because I need something. And so if I could just stop long enough, breathe the absurdity of that thought, and then step out, ask for help, lean into resources when it's uncomfortable. The more that I can do that, then the more that I can shift my default response so that, maybe in a year from now, when something comes up, my first response is, hey, I know this person and they really know a lot in this area or can provide support in this area. So I'm going to reach out. I mean, why not? Right. And so I think that what's also in this conversation is our this idea of comparison, this idea that everyone is living this Instagram life. And so if I ask for help, then I crack the facade of an Instagram life. And so, right?
Right.
And so I
Right.
think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the more we normalize conversations around challenge and impact of trauma, impact of societal influences, all these things are the challenges, the real lived experiences of our lives. The more that we normalize conversations around that, then the
Yeah.
easier it becomes to throw away that old coat of rugged individualism and put on a new jacket of community and connection and support. And so I think that just seems like a little shift, but I think that really begins to crack
Yeah.
this facade.
Yeah. Well, and then I think we get to see a world where people are being raised in
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
society where, yeah, I'm sure, there's still trauma, there's still adversity, but you have a society, an immediate support system that you're kind of born into
Mhm.
that I would think supports the idea
Yeah.
of those things being addressed and talked about. And we don't have, I would think, as much or any of that idea of like, oh, I can't ask for help or I shouldn't, or there's something wrong with, like, I think we begin to eliminate so many of the worthiness issues that
Mhm. Yeah.
most of us, at least here in the United States, learn from a very early age that you have to earn fill in the blank. You have to earn your worthiness. You have to earn love. You have to earn your ability to exist, to live, to eat, drink, be clothed, be housed, whatever. That you have to earn all that. I think we would lose a lot of that as like the default thinking.
Yeah.
And I think there'd be a greater understanding and a greater like alignment. Like I think we all kind of know, like there's somewhere in us that knows that to be true, that knows that we are by birth worthy of existing, worthy of having our basic needs met, worthy
Mhm.
of being loved, worthy of a roof over our heads, all of the things. And yet we have a society that's like,
Maybe
prove it.
not so much. Well,
Yeah.
and like when life, our the value of our life equals productivity. When we
Yeah.
had that system, then it's so easy to marginalize those that we do not see as productive based on that formula.
Right. Yes.
And so then we dehumanize people because, oh, no, you don't meet the criteria on this formula of productivity. So then I can create barriers and laws and things that actively impact your life because you haven't met the bar of worthiness and contributing to
Yeah.
the good of society, right? And so it's very easily then to dehumanize certain populations and people groups, um, and from this arbitrary formula, and then it just creates this, like, it just flips back on itself. And so I
It's
think,
very merit based.
yes, and so I
We
think what
meritized everything. Yeah.
and so I think that the power of these conversations is we're taking that back. We're destroying that formula,
Yeah.
and we're creating a, I don't know, the limitless field of possibility formula, like that your worth is not based on anything that you do,
Yeah.
or anything that you are, or anything that you say, or any work that you do,
Yeah.
right? It is, I don't know. It reminds me of the conversation that I think was Brene Brown in one of her books talked about, when she's on trips, someone will sit down beside of her and say, "So what do you do?" Like, that's
Oh.
the first question that we ask people. "So what do you
Yeah.
do?" As if what
Right.
you do for a living is somehow whatever. So
Mhm.
she has begun to flip that conversation. So she'll just say, she sits down beside someone, she goes, "What do you love?" And so it just flips this idea
Mm.
that our value, who we are, how we define ourselves is not like on this sort of productivity scale. And
Yeah.
I just thought that was good. So I think it's like those little shifts, I
Mm.
think really began to, I don't know. I think sometimes we're so overwhelmed because the system itself is overwhelming that
Yeah.
what can I do so I'm just paralyzed? But I think there are little
Yeah.
shifts in our own awareness and our own ways of thinking and talking about things that really can ripple out in really
Yeah.
powerful ways.
Yeah. No, I think so. And so on one hand, we kind of have this like utopian ideal society where and I think this may seem far off, but like I don't know how this would work, but we could all at some point just decide like, oh, we people created humans, we created this system, and we could just decide one day to not do it anymore. I don't know how that works, how that would happen, whatever. But like
Right,
that is not out of the realm of possibility. Like we all decided this is the system, or well, those in power, however they got there, at some point decided this is the system.
right.
Um, I'm leaving room for the possibility that we as people could somehow just decide one day, like, this is dumb. I don't want to do this anymore and just change the system. And so,
I think we're
we
doing
had,
that now. I think a lot of people are doing that now, like, "No,
yeah,
no, we're
yeah,
not doing that."
yeah. No, no,
I
thanks.
don't think so.
And so I could, yeah, I could see a society where people do things because that's what they really enjoy doing. And so you have some people who produce art, produce, here I go to production. That's so ingrained. There are some people who are artists because they love it, and whether they're doing it for themselves or they're doing it to be shared. There are some people who farm crops because they love it and they want to give it away. They want to feed their family. They want to feed the community. Like there are people who do all the things because we all have different interests. We all have different desires. Um, and I recently read a book series, the Monk and Robot series, which is this kind of like off
Sci-fi sort of.
sci-fi, off in a distant universe, humans living on a moon of some planet kind of thing, and they used to depend on robots for like everything. The robots did everything, so the robots were kind of the slaves, and there was this big like ethical like breakdown where they realized like this is like the robots kind of were like, hey, no, we're not doing this
Now
anymore, and the
don't
robot.
spoil this because I haven't read the series yet.
Oh, all right. All right, well, I won't ruin the really amazing, amazing book. Read them. Um, but one of the things that really stuck with me, because this is something that is always like, well, if we don't use money, what do we do? Well, what do we use?
Mhm,
And I think that's just a very like because the money system is so just ingrained in our lives.
right.
But these books tackle it in a really interesting way because they use these things called PEPs, and basically it's like everybody has an account and all the accounts are public, but I can give you credits based on your service, the value I perceive your service towards the community.
Mm.
And so it's just like a tracking. It doesn't really matter. Like, people go negative, and that's fine. And so that means like, oh, this person needs help, probably needs support. Let's go help them. Maybe they're sick, maybe whatever. And it's just
Right.
kind of this like system of like seeing how well everyone's doing or not. And so you
What a
go help
wonderful
some,
thought, right?
yeah,
What a
you go help
wonderful thought.
somebody do something, and they're like, wow, that was really helpful to me. Here's something. So I don't have to give anything of mine away for you to do that, but you benefit because you now have these to then, like, I could have 0 credits and give you credits,
Mhm.
and you have credits now to earn. Like,
Right.
it's a really interesting and I think powerful thought. But I know there's people out here who are like, yeah, yeah, but what about the money, or what about the whatever? And it's like, no, there are definitely ways of doing this where if it is decided that there needs to be some sort of exchange, because I'm like, well, I don't know, I want to go back to like bartering, because then we're just starting over, right? But there are other ways of doing this, and I think it just opens the door for like an expansive view on what is possible. So we
For
have
sure.
that one idea of like, here's the utopian perfect world, which totally possible, and I think we're probably more on the way than we think. We're just facing a lot of the upheaval from
Yeah.
trying to get from disruption, right?
Right.
Um, but one thing I know people are always asking about is like the very practical, like, yeah, yeah, but what do I do now? Like, what are the 3 steps? If we could nail down like 3 things, what are the 3 steps anybody could do now to start their, our collective path towards like doing it different?
Hmm. Well, I would say, and I think I said this before, but this could be one of the 3 steps. And I don't think these are in, like, step order, but I think there's if you are asking for 3 things.
Yeah.
Um, I think one is to become aware of our own conditioning in this, conversation of individualism. So,
Mm,
becoming aware of our own, um, the circumstances and situations that have us retracting in ourselves,
yeah,
and then being aware of those, and then making a conscious decision to make a different decision, right? And it may be uncomfortable. So, it's reaching and asking for help, when we need it, and not, really going against the grain of that my worth is based on, my ability to go 100 days without asking for help. It's been 100 days since, as if it's some sort of merit badge. I think also it is becoming more aware of the folks around us.
mhm,
I think it's becoming more aware of people beyond our, circle or people group, right? And so I think it's just becoming more aware of the experiences of others. Because I think when we do that, we normalize, we humanize these experiences that may be different from ourselves. And in doing that, it really puts us on a path of connection, on a path of realizing that we all have the same fears and doubts and desires. And it just looks different. And I think when we can do that, I think it really rattles the cages of rugged individualism.
yeah,
And I think, too, now, and this, I think this step is both internal and external, is that we have to begin to stop hustling for our worth and requiring others to hustle for their worth.
yeah,
And that means in our families, in our social groups, in our workplace, especially if we're in places of power and influences in any of those areas. I think we have to begin to really shift how we see people and their value and worth.
yeah,
Because I think what perpetuates it is that we're in situations, people that are in situations of power, influence, or managing folks, especially in the workplace, that we perpetuate these systems by how we treat the people
yep,
that we're managing. So I think in those are just some really small ways that we can begin to not only do the internal aspect of shifting, but also then bring it outwardly and
yeah,
impact. And then there's so many other ways, but
yeah,
if you're
yeah.
asking for 3, those
Well,
are like the first 3 that kinda come to
yeah,
my mind.
and I love that because they they feel like very manageable,
Yeah.
actionable steps. So they have I don't know, I don't want to say small because I don't want to minimize them, but like achievable, like very like immediately achievable
Yeah.
things, and the impact of which may not be small in any way. Like it might be, maybe like you look at your sphere of influence and say like, okay, in this area I have influence over me and
Yeah.
how I can do this one thing, and I'm going to do it for me differently. That is inherently going to then change however that lands on wherever that goes, whatever that is that makes a change. Maybe we look at our sphere of influence, and maybe you are one of those people in like a managerial or directorial role where you have oversight over a large group of people. That change could be massive because
Oh, yeah.
you change how you let people be at work, and that changes like
Every
families' lives, their work, the work lives of those family members. I mean, that changes. You're talking about like a lot of people, so that could potentially be drastic change. So I love that idea of like looking at your sphere of influence. What impact do you have?
Yeah.
And I think that does start by like exactly what you said, just like it's kind of like a taking inventory, like looking at your own self,
Mhm.
looking at yourself and how you act in the world, right? And like maybe it's something as simple as like picking up a book in a genre or by an author that you would have not ever typically read,
Right.
right? Like go learn about something different. Life in a different way, you know. Yeah. Yeah, pretty powerful, pretty powerful. So I have learned that these conversations are never ever done, and I'm
No.
sure we will talk about rugged individualism in the
Over
context of other
and
things.
over
Yeah.
and over again.
Whether we're talking about it directly or not, it will definitely come up. So, hope you all listening and watching have really enjoyed this. I know we can certainly get worked up about it, but it's with the best intentions possible to bring about new ways of doing things and kind of living this principled life. Uh, where we are willing to be in that in between, that place where shift happens, right? That's where the change happens. And so that's where we are as a collective with this topic of rugged individualism. We are in the in between, and shift is happening for sure. So thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time. And until then, we hope shift happens for you in the best way. Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between, but thanks for being here anyway. We may not have found all of the answers, but certainly some, and maybe more importantly, a little shift has happened. Because that is really what it's all about, learning to be curious, authentic, and yes, maybe even a tad bit vulnerable. And the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between. So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.